It's Tiffany Lorraine Galloway, certified high performance coach, with another episode of the Resilient Mother podcast. Today, we're going to talk about resilient overcomer when it comes to childhood trauma. And my expert with me today is Corinne. Corinne, thank you so much for being here. I'm excited to get your perspective on this subject. Please tell us more about you.
Oh, thank you for having me, Tiffany. Well, like you said, I'm Corinne Zuleger Life Coaching. I am an advanced trauma practitioner, along with having a neuroencoding certification, Dr. Daniel Amen brain health certification, Freedom Point, RAMP. I do a lot of subconscious work. So when it comes to working with traumas, I'm able to go in and deal with the subconscious aspect of things, and a whole host of other certifications. But my primary goal is to help people relate to themselves better, others, and the world around them. We not have them default back to their very best selves, because we all have stuff.
I love that so much. In Growth Day, I followed Dr. Amen when he was on there. I'm very familiar with his work.
Okay.
And I love that he takes a look at the
Mhm.
brain and he sees what's going on
Mhm.
in there and takes a deeper look. And I think that's what we need more of today, is to take that deeper look, either inside or in our relationships, and have more depth with other people, not just what's on the surface
Mhm.
of, do I like that or do I not like that? It's just not how our brains were
Mhm.
meant to work, that quick judgment. We were meant to have more depth with the questions we ask ourselves and that we ask others, so that we can get to the root of things. We can get to the heart of
Mhm.
things, not just what's on the surface. So I love that you have such a vast array of tools in your tool belt to help people with, but also I can feel your
Mhm.
heart in it. And I think that's really
Mhm.
important, because how can you help people heal their own
Mhm.
hearts or get to the heart of it if you're not coming from an authentic place yourself, so that they can feel safe with you and working with you through sometimes some dark places and dark things, especially when it comes to
Mhm.
trauma and childhood trauma, where the brain wasn't really fully developed to process whatever the trauma was, to create those patterns that don't serve. So I'm curious, what brought you into specifically wanting to work with trauma, and what
Mhm.
resilience means to you, and how
Mhm.
much you must enjoy helping people overcome things?
Well, what brought me into this background actually started with my brother died about 13 years ago, of an overdose, combination of opiates and alcohol. And that got me looking at, why do people die like that? Why do people use substances like that? Because 5 years before that, we lost my dad and to alcohol. And so this was a pattern, and I was looking for answers. And so I really started digging and digging into trauma, and then ultimately found the studies that were done on adverse childhood experiences.
Mm.
And the information that I learned from that just blew me away. And it was like, all the lights going on, starting to understand, um, how, like you were saying, right? When we're children, we don't necessarily understand the things that are going around us. And when I learned with all the brain science behind it, is, up until around age 10, everything that comes in through your senses is stored in our subconscious.
Mm.
And so, whether it's intentional or unintentional, you know, we don't have the ability to logic, because the prefrontal cortex is not developed yet. And so we take the stuff in, and it's stored in there. And then as life moves forward and we develop that prefrontal cortex, we can start to reason. But then all of a sudden, we can be moving along and life is going great. And then we can hit a wall and not really understand, why can't I have a normal relationship with a man? Why am I yelling at my kids? Um, we start to repeat the patterns, right? The things that we saw, the things that we heard. We're repeating these things because that's what's in there. And as I moved along through all that whole process, I was able to really take a good look at myself, because at that point, uh, my kids were, I already had all three of my kids. Um, I was like 38, so my oldest was like 16 years old or something like that. And it was really looking at, no, actually, I was older than that because I'm like trying to do the math here, but I was like 40 when my brother died, and 40 something. Can't, I'm tired. So, anyways, I recognized that a lot of the behaviors that I had, especially with my oldest child, that those were not healthy. That the way that I was as a mother, the yelling, I was a yeller, I used to throw things. Um, and I started to see that these were things that were done when I was a child. These were things that I saw. And as I started to unearth all of the trauma, I started to recognize I needed to do better. And as
And
I went on my
sometimes
own,
that's all that parents
yeah,
need. Like, they don't
yeah,
know. I recently
hmm,
did a certification because I'm looking
yeah,
at maybe working in the school district. So you have to have certain trainings, and one
hmm,
of them was on child abuse and reporting child abuse.
mm,
And one of the
yeah,
stories that they shared was actually a story about spanking in a way that was leaving marks. And when
yeah,
they went to the family and they approached them, there's like, well, but that's what my dad did to me. And my dad
hmm,
before me did that.
yeah,
But they just didn't know
right,
that it was wrong and that there was another way. And that
hmm,
story has a happy ending because the parents were more than willing to learn different and better ways
yeah,
of disciplining, of teaching, because it's more teaching more than disciplining. And that had a happy ending and a turnaround. So I think it's important not to be too harsh when we judge people, because if that's what
yeah,
they knew
hmm,
and that was their normal, they may not know another way.
right,
But some of
yeah,
us come to realize the patterns that we're doing are not serving us and not serving our kids, but not everybody comes to that
hmm,
realization completely on their own. Sometimes they need
right.
help.
Oh, absolutely. And that's where the education process comes in. That's
Mhm.
why I like to come on and talk about these things. For me, it's never about coming from a place of judgment because for me, I recognize like, first of all, my parents were teenagers. They were teens having babies, and my mom had all three of us by the time she was 21 years old.
Mm,
And they were doing the best they could with the information they had, and I
yeah,
always look at it like that. Um, Now at this point, right? But that was a whole process to get to the fact that, can I forgive them? Can I lovingly look at them and see, gosh, what happened to them?
mhm,
And the thing of it was primarily my dad. My mom was this amazing, beautiful human. Um, but it didn't stop from the things that happened within our house. And so it was important to me that as I began to unearth things, that I apologized to our children, which didn't undo any of the things that I did, other than they recognized that I was doing the best I could
yeah,
and give myself grace, because being a parent is extremely difficult. Um, Being a single parent is even more difficult when
mhm,
you're trying to do it all and have a job, and if you don't have a good support system, it just puts on additional stressors. Then you might have financial stresses, and all of that comes into how do we handle things.
yeah,
Yeah, and really looking at, from an emotional component. Um, Back in the day, like when I was growing up, they didn't talk about emotional intelligence. They weren't teaching us how to how to handle our emotions, and explosive, you know, anger was pretty normal. And so now, my goal is to really at look at it and say, how can I help teach parents? How can I help teach people around me good, healthy ways
Hmm.
to relieve stress. How can I support young parents out there? Because I've raised my three children. I've been able to take a peek and shine a light on the things that maybe were a little less than stellar. I don't beat myself up about it, um, because I know I really was operating from the best I could. But what can I bring forward and say, what, um, we can do better. Um, I can be of service in some way, and maybe that is healing the inner child that's in you, so that you can come from a space of I'm a healed inner child that's integrated with my adult, and now I know how to function better. And so then when I'm parenting, I can parent on a more conscious level, right? So that I can look at it and say, oh, like, this is a little human. This child does not know how to necessarily articulate their needs. And as a parent, it's important that I recognize that, because even teenagers who have words don't always necessarily know how to articulate what they need.
Hmm.
And that's where we come in, right? We get to come in and help them, and teach better, right? Because as parents, we are the first teachers that our children, and the most consistent teachers that our children will ever have. We're the ones paving the way and the
From
role
day one.
model aspect.
Yeah.
Yep. Right. And you are right. As a mama, you got your baby is in there too, and there's that, right? So that everything that you feel as a mom, your baby feels when they're inside of you. And so it's such a it's such a rich topic, as far as what you can learn and overcome. But I continue to add to that, and
Yeah.
I think you're doing the same thing.
Oh, absolutely. And I
Yeah,
love talking
yeah.
about in vitro, like pregnancy, because I don't think
Hmm.
people think that far into it. Some do, some that have struggled to get
Hmm.
pregnant, some that are thoughtful, think about the development inside of you. But it
Hmm.
became very
Yeah.
important to me during COVID because I was abandoned pregnant by who I thought we were going to get married, for making the story short. So
Hmm.
I just had to face it, lockdown and all of it, with a growing belly. And I made a very conscious decision that I was going to do everything in my power not to feel negative emotions while that child was developing inside of me, because I know that it affects the
Hmm.
child. I have I have some people in my life, the mom was not happy about being pregnant again, or were told they weren't wanted, they were an accident. And those people in my life,
Hmm.
it has affected their entire life from that in vitro
Hmm.
experience on, in a negative
Hmm.
way. So I made this
Hmm.
huge effort to do self-compassion, meditation, whatever I could.
Hmm.
So the child growing inside of me did not feel the abandonment, did not feel the things. I
Hmm.
mean, I still had to cry, I still had to outlet as much as possible, poured positivity into myself and into my body as much as possible. And the interesting
Yeah.
thing was I did that really well for about 2 years, and then it became about me again. So when it was
Mm,
I was motivated out of the love for my child, it was easier for me to do that. And then at some point,
mm,
I pulled back into old habits, and I had to go, "Wait a minute, that was working. That wasn't just working for my child, that was working for me. So I need to get
mhm,
back to that." So it became kind of this full circle process, but also just taking responsibility for the moment in my life. How did I get there? What was the pattern? What was the pattern in the relationships? What were the patterns in my family? How did I get in that situation in the first place? And that wasn't easy to face, but it was the only way I could take control of it and do something to
mhm,
change it, was to acknowledge it and to create awareness and to humble myself and to ask God for help, to ask for resources, for people to cross my path. And I've been so blessed to get to know so many in the personal development realm now
mhm,
that just truly inspire me, because they really show, no matter what you face, no matter what your circumstances are, you can overcome all of them. It doesn't
Yeah.
matter what is going on. And I like to apply that in
Mhm.
this podcast to motherhood in particular because I really feel like motherhood is sacred. And we've lost
Mm.
a sense of that in our
Mhm.
collective, and we're not valuing mother nearly as much as we need to. She's raising the next generation. She needs
Mhm.
our help. She needs their support. We need to
Yeah.
connect with each other. We need our
Mhm.
mom groups. We need those who've been through the trenches. You're who
Mhm.
I want to talk to. I want to talk to somebody on the
Mhm.
other side of teenager, so I know how to do
Mhm.
teenager. So I know how to raise my kids to where they still
Yeah.
want a relationship with me. They still want to hang out with me. And
Mhm.
for me too,
Mhm.
there's trauma passed on to me from past generations. I'm starting to realize
Mhm.
I'm the one that's that catalyst for change, and it's not easy at all to be in that role. But when you see the effects and you don't want them to continue or you felt them, I think it
Mhm.
helps a little bit because then I think, okay, who did I need? Who did I need to
Mhm.
show up? What would that person have been like? What would that person have said? What would they have done
Mhm.
that would have actually helped me? But I think too, it's kind of forced me to heal that inner child that you're talking about and go back and go,
Mhm.
yeah, that happened. I'm the adult now. I got you. I got this. I
Yeah.
got what we've been through. And I could name off a gazillion things that I've been through. I can
Yeah.
relate to almost anyone when
Sure.
it becomes some kind of form of trauma,
Mhm.
especially in the narcissist realm. I've experienced kind of all of it.
Oh.
And I'm still here. And I'm still
Mhm.
showing up, and I'm still working on myself. I still apologize to my kids once in a while, but I'm making progress. I'm finding tools. I'm doing this podcast. I'm learning from other people. Like, there's no limit to what you can do once you decide to make that shift. And if you can do that
Mhm.
while you're raising your kids, they get to see that and then they will model it. Then they will know they
Yes.
can overcome. Then they know they can be resilient. But it starts from the very beginning. And not
Mhm.
every beginning is ideal. Some pregnancies are a surprise.
Yeah.
Sometimes, or you have another one
Mhm.
sooner than you thought you were going to have the next one, or you're
Mhm.
struggling to get pregnant, or like there is no such thing as perfect timing with these things and being
Mm-mm.
completely prepared, but you can be intentional. You can be
Mhm.
aware, and then you can start making the choices that move you in that direction. And you can start
Mhm.
that any day. If you're listening to this and you're going, I'm a hot mess. Yeah, I'm a hot mess some days too, but at some point I made a choice. I'm going to do better. And then you
Yeah.
just take it one day at a time. So it's never too late. Don't feel like it's too late. Don't feel like you're unique. Don't feel like you're alone. Somebody out there, another mother wants the same things that you want. There's another mother going through what you're going through, but you get to
Yeah.
decide what your story is. You get to decide what the legacy is that you're going to leave your kids on, what a mother is.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And the thing of it is motherhood, it it's different for everyone, right?
Mm.
It gets to be what you want it to be. There's this illusion, I think with social media especially, is that well, and I had this like I when my youngest one was around 2, I had a nervous breakdown.
Mm.
And a lot of it was because I just was, I was trying to be all the things that everybody else told me a mom should be.
Yeah.
And, that like, Pinterest and, everything from scratch and all the things but that wasn't authentic me. Like authentic me, really when I look at it, I did raise the kids this way because they love the outdoors, but authentic me, I love to be outside. We are a hiking family, nature family. I'm, hands in the dirt family. And but I was really trying to be, oh, well, I gotta bake that from scratch or make these Valentines. And there was this like competitiveness. Um and just trying to keep up with that was too much. And, you know, just I never asked for help, right? Because
Mhm.
my philosophy was, I mean, my mom, she had all three of us by the time she was 21. And so she raised us and, her mom died when I was 4 months old, and so she didn't have all that
Mm.
help, and, well, if she could do it on her own, I should be able to do it all myself, and so I never asked. I
Yeah.
didn't, I
Why do
didn't
we do
say,
that to
"Hey."
ourselves? Why?
Right?
Why do we do
Yeah,
that?
exactly. Right, because there what I learned was there's so many other women out there that would be like, yeah, hey, like, yeah, I'll take your kids for a couple hours.
Mhm.
I'll take your kids while you go to the grocery store. Hey, my kids were with me all the time. I haven't have any regrets whatsoever, other than the fact that I didn't ask for help
Mm.
because it got to be too much, right?
Yeah.
And that it wore on my soul, and it broke me down mentally, right? And there the breakdown occurred. And, that really kind of fed into how, I was depressed. It was just, there was suicidal ideation. There was a lot of stuff that was going on there. And
Which is so true to anyone who doesn't
yeah,
resolve their trauma. At some point,
yes,
it's gonna catch up with you. If you
yeah,
don't face it, it just gets to a point it's either a
it
volcano
does.
that bowls over or it knocks you down. We and
Yeah.
and yeah, we some of us have to hit rock bottom. Sometimes rock bottom has a basement,
Mm, mm-hmm,
but it doesn't have to be that way. Uh,
mm.
Sometimes you can catch it sooner, but
Absolutely.
when you're
And
coming
ask
from a
for help.
real dysfunctional, traumatic
Mm,
previous generation or even 2 back sometimes,
mm,
it takes someone who really has a special calling to do that healing, and so
mm.
if you find you're that
Yeah,
person, don't take it as, "Why me?" Why not you? You're the strong one. If it
heck
was put
yeah.
on you, it's because
Hmm.
someone knew
Yeah.
you could break those generational curses, and actually it
Hmm.
speaks volumes of who you are and your
Hmm.
capacity for your soul and for your heart to take that all on, not just for you but the generations before and the generations to come. And I
Hmm.
feel like there's a lot of that going on in the world right now with the big shift as we start to really realize we can't just go through the motions and do
Hmm.
things for the wrong reasons. It eats at our soul. Like, we have to do the things that fulfill us as a mom, as a
Hmm.
human being, to be able to sustain ourselves, to be able to really have true strength.
Yeah. Yeah. And to have, because what we desire matters too.
Yeah.
It's not that, um, I can remember, feeling selfish, I mean, how dare I want to spend some time alone? And
Mm,
then now I see it, right? The hindsight's always 2020.
yep.
And it's like, had I taken the time alone, right, I could have been in a better space,
Yeah.
to parent better.
Yeah.
Um, and it is really, we're going to learn and we're going to grow, and mistakes are going to be made, and forgiveness can be sought. But when it comes to, the generational trauma, and you start looking at, whether it's substance abuse, abuse of any nature
Yeah.
that that children have to undergo, like, to me, that's just a hard no. And so what I really learned is, when I learned to love myself, if that's the first and foremost, the most important thing I can do, and
Mm,
so I put me on the schedule first now, instead of giving, or instead of taking what might be left for a little scrap of time or whatever, in give myself that first time slot in the morning is my time, so that I can, and even if it means getting up a little early, but being able to, have some time where I can enjoy a cup of coffee, and, I can read a little bit, or I can take in the nature, walk in the grass, whatever it is. But that time that is, if that's for me to connect, right? For me to connect to God, for me to connect to myself, for me to connect to my partner, whatever it is, but it's the me time. And then that makes me a better human. I'm
yeah.
like,
Well, and as you
yeah,
said that, I was just thinking, so often it comes back to love, doesn't it?
oh yeah.
It's the ultimate power in the universe, and when
Mm-hmm.
we learn to truly
Hmm.
love ourselves, we can overcome anything, because that's where our
Absolutely.
strength lies. That's where the
Mhm.
things are inside of us that nobody can take away from us, no matter what we're going through or what someone's done to us. If we can truly love ourselves exactly as we are, where we're at,
Mhm.
you're more powerful than anyone who's doubting themselves, questioning
Mhm.
themselves, living in the past, or fearing the future. You are
Mhm.
whole. And when we're whole, we
Yeah.
flow, we
Oh,
glow, we
yeah.
shine, and we want that for our
Mhm.
kids. So we have to be the examples of that. But I
Yeah,
think love
absolutely.
is underrated, and self
Mhm.
love in particular is
Sure.
really underrated for what it can do.
Mhm. Well, and authenticity, right? So
Mhm.
if I can be my authentic self, and like I said, I mean, for me, I'm really casual by nature, well, pretty easygoing, but we can be led to believe that these external things, the things that are going on around us, should have more weight or bear more weight than what it is that I'm being led to in my heart. And I
Yeah.
just, I caution against that in when it comes to, overcoming things. That is the it's always going to be a you and you deal.
Mm. Yep.
We can project the blame out, and I know really crappy things happen all the time to
Yes.
people. Like really crappy things
Mhm.
happen. And as an adult, I can make a choice, right? I take responsibility for my life and I make the choices. I decide what's going to happen. Our children are counting on us.
Yeah.
They're counting on us to make those choices, and they are always watching. I can remember growing up and hearing the phrase, "Do as I say, not as I do." And I look
Mm.
at that now and I'm like, "Oh my god, that was the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard in my life." Because because everything you do is you're modeling. So whether you have your own children or not, because as an adult, you are always modeling for every young person that's around you. So everything we do, they're like little sponges and it's all getting dumped into them. And so if I'm unkind to my neighbors, if I'm unkind to myself, if I'm looking in the mirror and I'm scolding my body, and my children are watching, they're hearing, right? They see that what am I eating? What am I drinking? Am I smoking? All of the things. And then, if I cut somebody off in traffic and I flip them off or I lose my temper and these are how I handle myself, they see it.
Yeah.
And
Well,
there's so
and
much goes into that,
but we're
right?
also human. They do need to see
We
that we're
are.
human. They do
They
need to see that
do.
we're vulnerable, but
Hmm.
let them see us doing the work. Let them see us
Yeah.
seeking to improve. Let them see us love ourselves and give ourselves grace
Hmm.
and do better
Hmm.
the next time, because
Yeah.
then they'll be
Mhm.
able to do that instead of beat themselves
Absolutely.
up. I think the worst thing is to have this
Yeah.
a very loud critical voice
Oh,
that
for
that
sure.
stops you
Yeah.
from really making your own progress,
Yeah.
which is often just the limits you're putting on yourself. And sometimes they're a
Yeah.
voice of somebody else's expectation.
Mhm.
There's somebody else's idea of who you
Mhm.
are. As you were talking earlier, I was thinking of, I shared a little bit of my story of kind of being a chameleon to survive my
Mhm.
dysfunctional household and lifestyle, and how that was such a disservice because I didn't know who I was. I'd really
Mhm.
learned how to be an actress for whoever I
Mhm.
was with and to tell them what they
Sure.
wanted to hear and be who they wanted
Mm.
or needed me to be to get praise or to get
Mhm.
attention, and how that just was hollow because
Mm.
it wasn't authentic, it wasn't real.
Sure.
And now piecing those pieces together as I continue to be aware, and it's tricky because there were pieces of me that showed up that are my
Mhm.
strengths, that are my traits to
Mhm.
get my needs met, but there were other things like the motive or the reason behind it or pushing myself too hard or the times I should have said no instead of yes that I
Mhm.
constantly have to sort now.
Mhm.
And I think that's the tricky thing with trauma is not who you are. The
Oh, no.
trauma is not you. The negative voice,
Mm.
the critical voice is not you, and when you can really
Mm.
separate yourself from that is when you can really make progress, but
Mhm.
it may take being quiet. it may take stepping back and
Sure.
taking that time to do that
Mhm.
healing for yourself, so then you can really show up in the way that you want to. And I'm still learning to pace myself in that way.
Mhm.
I'm a high energy person, but I'm realizing I need some quiet time. I do need some alone time as a mom,
Mhm.
and there's some things that aren't resolved that I know I need a little help with, but I'm willing to admit those things. But I'm still better than I was yesterday. I'm still
Oh,
better
yeah.
than I was 6 months ago. I'm still better than I was a year ago, and I'm a heck of a
Mhm.
lot better than I was 5 years ago. And that's who
Mhm.
I'm stepping into and who I'm becoming,
Yeah.
and what my and I have to honor that in my kids too. Like,
Mhm.
to see them, to have a teenager really figuring out who they are, not quite being able
Yeah.
to express what they need, the logic not being there. Sometimes I'm
Mhm.
noticing some things, and it's just part of the process. We're all
It is.
somewhere along this progression that we're making. You just have to honor people where they're at, including
Yeah.
your kids, and just meet
Yeah.
them where they're at and meet yourself where you're at.
Well, and recognize too, right? They're different. Every child is gonna be different. There is
Absolutely.
no manual really out there on how to raise them. They're each gonna have different needs. And when you were talking about the inner critic, that voice that's inside of you, that inner critic voice is really the accumulation of the negative things that were said to you. So that voice that you hear, right, it's not you, and it's most certainly not. It's not coming from your soul. And for the neuroencoding that I do, we have an acronym that we use, and it's called STOP.
Mm,
And so when the little voice starts chattering away at you, and you're looking to, or you're pulling up a past memory that's trying to drag you down, you literally yell, "Stop," and you stand up, which is the S. You're going to take a deep breath. I like to put my hand on my heart. And then I think of the outcome. That's the O. What's
mm,
the outcome that I really want? And what I like to put in there is something that brings me joy. So whether it's watching a sunset, or a sunrise, or puppies, or my kids laughing, or whatever it is that brings you joy, you insert.
mhm.
There you take your deep breath, insert that memory in there that brings you joy, and then you praise yourself. You celebrate the fact that you just broke up that thought process. And you can do that by patting yourself on the back or shaking your booty. But praise is the thing that is often forgotten, right? We don't celebrate ourselves enough.
Mhm.
And being able to break a thought process from, that was really dragging me down, or, that inner chatter that was happening, that's a big win. And
Yeah.
you can teach that to your kids. It's so helpful, right? Because
It's
it's
so
like, oh,
simple too. I love that. Yeah.
simple, right? It's just stop. And the main thing is, when you say stop, and you holler stop, and you stand up, it creates a little space in your brain called a scotoma. So it's like, when you're sitting in the living room watching TV, and you are like, oh, I got to get this from the kitchen, and you go to stand up, and then you walk in the kitchen, and you're like, oh, what the heck did I come in here for?
Yep.
And you're like, oh yeah, and then you're like, oh yeah, and it takes you a second.
And it
That's
disrupts the pattern. It like
Yep, it's
Yep.
yep, it's that little bitty space and time too, where you have to insert something new. And so that's
Mhm.
where the joy piece comes in, because it's like, now I'm like, oh, now I'm thinking about sunsets, or I'm thinking about puppies, or kids laughing, or whatever else it is, and I'm no longer thinking about whatever it was that was dragging me down. And the more you do that, the repetition of it will create a new it will create a new pattern, a new wiring in your brain.
I remember
And then you
using that from, childhood abuse that I had. I had a particular disturbing image that would haunt me, frankly, and it
okay.
kept coming, and, we just didn't talk about it. I probably need more counseling, but, I went to enough counseling, and then we don't talk about it, and I'm still dealing with these
Yeah.
thoughts. And I think through
Mm.
theater or just other things where we use a lot of visualization and we create characters and things, I just started replacing the image with a different
Mm.
image, and
Okay.
over and over and over again. I had
Mhm.
to do it for quite a while, and now it's automatic. If that thought comes, it changes to the other image that I've decided to
Okay.
replace it with. And I think we
Awesome.
underestimate how malleable the mind is.
Oh,
And
yeah. Mhm.
and kids especially, like the sooner we can start healing or processing anything for them, the better, because the
Yeah.
patterns that they have when they're younger.
Mhm.
But it doesn't mean if you're older and you have a pervasive pattern or thought process that's really getting to you. There are so many ways of doing it. This is a great simple one. There's more complicated ones like EMDR
Yeah.
work and there's other
Oh, sure.
things, but
Mhm.
there are options. There's no reason anyone should feel like they have pervasive thoughts or critical mind or negative things. They're
Mhm.
not you. They're not
Right.
serving you. You're not just that way. This is not just who you
Right.
are. You are meant to thrive. You are meant to be positive.
Mhm.
You are meant to feel whole and feel comfortable in your own skin and with your own mind and with your own
Mhm.
thoughts. And it may not even be your trauma. It might be trauma passed down to you. It might
Heck
be
yeah.
something
Mhm.
that's not even on you or something that's happened when you were so little you don't even remember and your mind may have shut it down. I know in some of the
Mhm.
therapy I've done that I've had memories that were locked away in my mind on purpose to protect
Mm.
me that
Sure.
once I was safe
Mhm.
came out, and some of them were quite huge to deal with, but they've
Mhm.
all served me as I faced them and been
Yeah.
able to change them, and that it is possible. And it's so lovely when you can take something that's a negative trigger and flip it around and turn it into a positive trigger instead.
Yeah.
And then you're choosing every day where your mind's going to go in those patterns. And it's
Mhm.
repetition, repetition, repetition with the mind. And so one being aware, okay, that doesn't
Oh,
serve
yeah.
me. Replace it. Replace it.
Yeah.
It's like trying to tell an addict to just stop. You can't
Oh,
stop.
yeah.
You have to replace what was meeting the need with something more positive, with something
Mhm.
healthy. If you were drinking, why were you drinking? You got to go
Mm.
deeper.
Mhm.
If you were on the drugs, why were you on the drugs? Were you
Mm.
numbing an emotion? Were you is there
Right.
something you haven't dealt with? No negative pattern
Mhm.
we get into has doesn't have something that it's feeding or being fed off of. And you just gotta flip it. You gotta find the positive way to deal with it. Maybe you
Yeah.
go running instead. Maybe you find a hobby instead. I mean, there's just so many
Mhm.
things out there for us to explore in this
Mhm.
beautiful world that you can find your
Yeah.
path. You know, nature is your thing. Music is my thing. My
Mhm. I love music too.
daughter's into drawing. I've got,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
and letting our kids express themselves and explore those healthy
Oh.
outlets is so important, and I think the arts
Mhm.
are especially important, and I'm glad we've been able to keep that in some schools,
Yeah.
but in others, we have resources online, though. My daughter taught herself piano off of YouTube, so, I mean, the
I
sky's the
love it.
limit,
Oh,
really, if you're given the right
yeah.
tools and the right environment
Mhm.
today. And
Sure.
so
Yeah.
if you're gonna help someone, if you're gonna help your child, just I really think it's important to realize you're replacing something. It's not like,
Yeah.
yes, stop the pattern, but like you said, you gotta fill it with something else right away. It's not
Yep.
just
Mhm.
stop because the
Yeah.
need will still be there. The void will still
Yeah.
be there. The trauma will
Mhm.
still be there.
Yeah, we wanna, it with trauma, it happened, but the
Mhm.
more we focus on it, that we give it the energy, right? And so
Yeah.
the goal really being is to replace it, like you said, and that goes to, you know, any sort of thing where there's a habit that maybe could be viewed negative, a negative habit is to replace it with something that is going to serve you in a positive manner. But now we could go down a whole
Another rabbit hole. Yeah, we could do
whole
a whole
rabbit
nother
hole. Yeah,
episode. Well, it looks like we have gone
absolutely.
over a little bit here, but I love this
Okay.
subject matter. It's dear to my
Yeah.
heart because I've been
Hmm.
through it and I know there's others going through it and it's a
Yeah,
process and sometimes it's 2 steps
absolutely.
forward and 3 steps back but as long
Hmm.
as you're on that path, as long as you're starting down that road, you can get there and maybe Corinne is who you want to work with. Maybe you want to
Yeah.
do high performance habits with me. Maybe there's another guest on the podcast that resonates with you. But the idea here is here's a
Hmm.
resource for mothers in particular. because your role is so important in shaping the next generation and in supporting where the world is going, that you really rock the hand that rocks the cradle rules the world.
Yeah.
And we have great
Mhm.
power, and we want to do good. Most of us want to see our children thrive. We want to see the next generation do better than we
Oh,
did.
yeah.
And
I
we
think
have the
every
power.
mother wants that.
Every mother wants that. And we have the power, we have the
Everyone does.
tools. Let's share each other, let's help each other, let's
Mhm.
celebrate each other, let's count
Mhm.
those wins, and let's shift the world
Mhm.
in that direction, even if it's one podcast episode, one person, or one child at a time. It
Yeah.
all makes a difference for the collective of our humanity. So, Corinne, if people want to work with you, where can they find you?
At CorinneZuleger.com. They can
Right,
also find
right
me
there.
on
No, right,
Instagram.
right
Yeah.
there. That's right
Yep.
there.
They can find me right there, and that's the best way to find me, on my website. And like I said, on Instagram, it's Corinne_Zuleger, and I'm on Facebook. But the best way, my website.
Great. Well, if you want to be a guest on the
Yeah.
Resilient Mother podcast, reach out to me. We're starting to collect
Mhm.
people for next year. Collect, I don't know if that's the right word, but we're looking for guests for next year, and we're looking at amping up this podcast to the next level with a co-host and with some new marketing and different ideas. So, if you want to be a guest,
Very
reach
cool.
out to me and get on that
Mhm.
list, as we're going to start doing that and ramping up for next year in a
Mhm.
new approach. And remember, I believe in you, believe in yourself. God bless, and we'll see you next time on the next episode of the Resilient Mother podcast.